A flight attendant slapped a mother holding her infant in front of stunned passengers. But within hours, she learned the baby's father wasn't just another traveler. He was the man who owned the airline she worked for. Shanice Marlowe had been through long travel days before, but nothing like this. The layover in Phoenix had already drained her patience. By the time she and her 8-month-old son, Jalen, were called to board their connection to Minneapolis, she just wanted a smooth final leg of the trip. She stepped onto the jet bridge, adjusting the diaper bag strap on her shoulder, cradling Jalen in her other arm. His cheeks were warm against her neck, his tiny fists clutching her blouse. He had been restless all morning, the kind of restless only a baby can manage, where you're never quite sure if they're tired, hungry, or just annoyed at the world. The cabin was already busy when she stepped in. Overhead bins snapped shut. A couple of passengers in the middle rows were trying to squeeze past each other in the aisle. Shanice tried to work her way to row 14, bouncing Jalen gently, whispering little promises in his ear that they'd be seated soon. But the seatbelt sign dinged, and the pace of boarding quickened. That's when she heard the voice. "Ma'am, you need to move faster. We have other passengers to seat." Shanice turned slightly. A flight attendant, slender, mid-50s, with a tight blonde bun and a badge that read Colleen Dresner, was standing a few rows behind, her arms crossed. Her tone wasn't just firm. It was sharp, like she was scolding a child. "I'm trying," Shanice replied softly, keeping her voice calm. "Just need to put my bag up." Colleen stepped closer, cutting her off. "You need to keep that baby quiet and move to your seat. People are waiting." Jalen whimpered. The sound that always meant a full cry was seconds away. Shanice shifted him higher on her shoulder, trying to slide her bag into the overhead bin with one hand. The strap caught on another passenger's handle, and she struggled for a second to free it. Colleen moved in fast. Shanice didn't even register what was happening until she felt it. A sting across her forearm, right above Jalen's head. Colleen had slapped her. Not hard enough to injure, but firm enough to shock. "Control your child," Colleen muttered, her words low but pointed. For a moment, Shanice didn't move. Her mind struggled to catch up with her body. Had this woman just put her hands on her? In front of all these people? While she was holding her baby? The row in front went quiet. A man in a baseball cap leaned back to see. A young woman across the aisle reached for her phone. Shanice could feel her face heat, not from embarrassment, but from something deeper. "What did you just do?" she asked, her voice rising just enough to carry. Colleen's face was unreadable. "Ma'am, I'm trying to keep the boarding process on schedule. Please take your seat." "That's not what I asked," Shanice shot back. She tightened her hold on Jalen, who had started to cry in earnest now. His wails filled the cabin. "You don't put your hands on me, ever!" "Ma'am," Colleen began again, but the young woman with the phone now had it recording, and the man in the baseball cap was watching closely. From seat 14C, a man with broad shoulders and a calm, steady presence had stood up. His eyes locked on Shanice, then shifted to Colleen. This was Victor Marlowe, Shanice's husband. To Colleen, he was just another passenger. "Is there a problem?" he asked evenly, his voice deep but controlled. Colleen gave him a thin smile. "We're just having a little misunderstanding about boarding." Victor's gaze stayed on her for a long moment. He didn't say anything more, yet. Instead, he stepped into the aisle, took Shanice's carry-on from her hand, and slid it easily into the overhead bin. He guided her toward their seats without another word, but the damage was done. Passengers whispered as Shanice sat down, still holding a crying Jalen. She could see the phone in the young woman's hand angled just enough to keep filming. Her forearm still tingled where Colleen's hand had landed. She leaned toward Victor. "She hit me," she whispered. Victor's eyes flicked toward the galley where Colleen now stood, busying herself with pre-flight checks. "I know," he said quietly. "Let's get through this flight." But Shanice could tell from his tone, this wasn't going to be forgotten. But the flight was only just beginning, and before they even reached cruising altitude, things in the cabin would get even more tense. The aisle felt tighter now, as if the air had shifted. People who had been minding their own business during boarding were suddenly invested in what was going on in row 14. The energy wasn't loud. It was the kind of quiet where everyone is watching, waiting for the next thing to happen. Shanice sat stiff in her seat, one arm wrapped around Jalen, the other resting protectively on his back. He was still crying, his small body jerking against her with each sob. She gently rocked him, murmuring words only he could hear. Her mind was spinning, replaying the moment of the slap again and again. Across the aisle, the man in the baseball cap leaned toward the woman with the phone. "You get that on video?" he whispered. "Yeah," she replied without taking her eyes off the screen. "Clear as day." 2 rows up, a teenage boy peered between the seats, his earbuds dangling uselessly around his neck. A middle-aged woman across from him gave Shanice a sympathetic glance, but the attention wasn't just on her. People were glancing toward the front, where Colleen moved briskly from one side of the aisle to the other, handing out safety cards and greeting late boarders, as if nothing had happened. Shanice felt a tap on her arm. She turned to see a young man in his 20s, leaning slightly into the aisle from the row behind her. "I saw what she did," he said quietly. "If you need me to say something, I will." "Thank you," Shanice replied, her voice low but steady. "I appreciate it." Victor sat beside her, silent, his expression unreadable. He had pulled out his phone and was typing something quickly. From the corner of her eye, Shanice saw him send what looked like a short message before sliding the phone into his jacket pocket. "Victor," she said softly, "are you going to—" "Not yet," he replied without looking at her. Timing matters. The flight attendants made their way down the aisle, checking seatbelts. Another crew member, younger and visibly nervous, reached their row. She gave Shanice a fleeting look that seemed to say she knew something was wrong, but didn't dare comment. When she passed, Victor leaned slightly toward Shanice. "That one knows." She saw. Before Shanice could respond, Colleen returned. Her smile looked almost rehearsed, but her voice carried an edge. "Sir, ma'am, are we all settled now?" Shanice didn't answer. Victor looked up at her instead. "Yes," he said evenly. "We're settled." Colleen lingered for a moment, her eyes flicking between them, then moved on. The safety announcement began, but most passengers weren't paying much attention. A few were still glancing at Shanice, then at Colleen, and back again. The woman with the phone adjusted her grip, making sure she kept both in frame whenever possible. The plane began to taxi, engines rumbling underfoot. Shanice focused on calming Jalen, pressing her cheek to his head. He had quieted to soft hiccups, his tiny fingers curling into her sweater. As they lifted off the runway, the seatbelt sign remained on. Colleen moved through the cabin with drink menus, her voice projecting as though nothing unusual had happened. But every now and then, Shanice noticed her eyes flick toward row 14. The tension was starting to press on the other passengers. The teenage boy 2 rows ahead whispered something to his mother, who shook her head, her lips pressed into a thin line. The man in the baseball cap finally spoke up, his voice carrying just enough to reach Shanice. "They can't treat people like that," he said to no one in particular, especially someone holding a baby. Several passengers murmured in agreement. A woman in the back called out, "I've got it on video too." Colleen stiffened, but didn't turn around. Victor remained calm, his hands folded loosely in his lap. But Shanice could tell his patience was controlled, deliberate. He wasn't ignoring what happened. He was watching, storing every detail. Halfway through the climb, the younger crew member returned with a cup of water for Shanice. She handed it over quietly. "For you," she said, almost under her breath. "Thank you," Shanice replied, taking the cup. The crew member hesitated. I just wanted to say I'm sorry for what you went through." Her eyes darted toward the front before she hurried away. Shanice felt a rush of gratitude, but also something else, validation. Someone in uniform had seen the wrong in it. Victor leaned toward her again. "It's not just us who knows now," he murmured. But the real confrontation hadn't even started, and the altitude would only make the next exchange sharper. Cruising altitude came with the usual signs. The seatbelt light chimed off, trays began dropping down, and the low shuffle of passengers adjusting themselves filled the cabin. But in row 14, Shanice's thoughts were nowhere near the drink cart. She could feel eyes still darting toward her from time to time. Jalen was calmer now, gnawing gently on the corner of a soft toy. Victor sat next to her, scanning the cabin with quiet precision, his posture relaxed, but his attention razor sharp. Colleen emerged from the galley with the drink cart, working her way down the aisle. Her interactions with passengers were quick and clipped, a far cry from the warm smiles Shanice had seen from other crew members on past flights. When the cart rolled up to row 14, Colleen's expression tightened. She avoided Shanice's eyes and addressed Victor instead. "Something to drink?" "Water," Victor said, his voice measured. Colleen poured it, setting the plastic cup on his tray table. Then she turned her gaze, finally, to Shanice. For you? Shanice didn't break eye contact. No thank you, she replied, her tone even, but carrying weight. Colleen lingered for a moment, as though expecting Shanice to say more. Shanice didn't. The man in the baseball cap leaned slightly forward from the row behind. How about an apology? He said, his voice just loud enough for the surrounding rows to hear. Colleen's lips pressed together. Sir, I'm doing my job. Slapping a woman holding a baby is your job? He cut in. Several passengers shifted in their seats, some turning toward the conversation. The young woman with the phone had it raised again, recording every word. Colleen's composure began to fray. Sir, I won't be spoken to like... Victor's voice cut through smoothly. What you won't do is put your hands on my wife and then try to carry on like it didn't happen. Colleen froze for half a second, her eyes locking on him. The cart stood still between them. I suggest you move the cart, Victor said calmly. We'll speak when you're ready to address this properly. There was no raised voice, no aggressive tone, just a steady command that made the surrounding rows go still. Colleen finally pushed the cart forward, her steps quicker now. She didn't stop again until she reached the galley at the back. Shanice exhaled, her grip on Jalen loosening. You didn't have to say anything right now, she murmured to Victor. Yes, he replied, eyes forward. I did. The younger crew member reappeared minutes later, her expression tense. She knelt slightly beside Shanice's row. She's not happy, she whispered. She thinks she can make the captain remove you for disrupting boarding. Shanice's jaw dropped. She hit me, in front of witnesses, and now she's trying to... I know, the crew member said quickly. I just wanted to give you a heads up. If anything happens, I'll tell the captain what I saw. Victor's gaze shifted to her. Thank you. That won't be necessary, but I appreciate your integrity. The crew member gave a short nod and slipped away before Colleen returned. When Colleen did come back, it wasn't with the cart. It was with a folded napkin and a smile that didn't reach her eyes. She stopped at row 14. Sir, ma'am, she began, I think we had a misunderstanding earlier. I didn't mean... You touched me, Shanice said, cutting her off. Her voice wasn't loud, but the firmness in it was unmistakable. There's no misunderstanding about that. Colleen glanced around at the passengers watching, then lowered her voice. Ma'am, if we could just move past this... No, Victor interrupted, his tone steady. We're not moving past anything. You should think very carefully about how you want to handle the rest of this flight. For a long moment, Colleen stood there, the tension between them so thick that even passengers in the next row leaned back slightly. Then she straightened her posture, muttered something under her breath, and walked away. The man in the baseball cap leaned forward again. She's rattled, he said quietly to Shanice. Shanice didn't respond right away. She looked down at Jalen, who was gnawing on his toy, as though nothing in the world had happened. Her hand brushed over his small back. Victor reached for her free hand under the armrest. This isn't over, he said simply. But it wouldn't be the flight crew deciding how the story ended. It was about to spill far beyond the cabin once they touched the ground. The rest of the flight played out in an awkward kind of silence. Colleen stayed mostly at the front, finding tasks that didn't require her to pass row 14. Every so often, Shanice caught her glancing over, but only briefly, as though she was worried someone would notice. Passengers continued their quiet conversations. The woman with the phone occasionally tapped her screen, likely sending clips to someone on the ground. The man in the baseball cap kept looking at Shanice with an expression somewhere between outrage and solidarity. Even the teenage boy a few rows ahead had his phone aimed discreetly toward the front whenever Colleen moved. When the captain's voice came over the intercom announcing their descent into Minneapolis, Shanice felt her stomach tighten. She wasn't afraid of what might happen. She was just ready for this flight to end. Victor seemed to sense her tension. When we land, he said, keeping his tone even, don't say a word until I'm done talking. Okay, she agreed, shifting Jalen in her arms so he could watch the window as the ground drew closer. The plane touched down with a soft bump, reverse thrusters roaring briefly before the deceleration eased. As the seatbelt sign went off, passengers began the usual shuffle, grabbing bags, stretching, leaning into the aisle. But Shanice noticed something different this time. 2 airline staff members in Navy uniforms were waiting just beyond the door of the jet bridge. They weren't smiling, and their eyes were scanning the rows as people began to deplane. Victor stood, pulling Shanice's bag from the overhead bin without a word. He slung it over his shoulder, then motioned for her to follow. As they stepped into the aisle, the woman with the phone leaned toward Shanice. "I already posted it," she whispered. "It's getting shared fast." "Thank you," Shanice replied, her voice low. Colleen was positioned near the exit door, her posture stiff, her gaze fixed straight ahead. She didn't make eye contact as Shanice and Victor walked past. At the end of the jet bridge, the two staff members stepped forward. "Mr. and Mrs. Marlowe?" one asked. "Yes," Victor replied calmly. "We'd like to speak with you about an incident that occurred during boarding," the other said, glancing briefly toward Shanice. Before Victor could respond, a voice from behind them cut in. "You'll want to talk to me too," the man in the baseball cap said, holding up his phone. "I've got it all right here." The staff exchanged a quick look. "Let's move to the gate area," one of them suggested. They stepped into a quieter corner of the terminal, away from the flow of disembarking passengers. The younger crew member from the flight had followed them, her eyes darting nervously between Shanice and the airline staff. "I saw everything," she said quickly. Colleen slapped her. It wasn't an accident. The baby was in her arms. It was unprofessional and dangerous. The staff member in charge took a deep breath, clearly weighing his next words. "Mr. and Mrs. Marlowe, we take reports like this very seriously." Victor's tone was cool but direct. "Good, because you're going to take it seriously right now. This wasn't just a bad interaction. This was physical contact, completely unprovoked, in front of multiple witnesses and cameras, and it happened on your aircraft." The woman with the phone stepped forward. "It's already online," she said. "People are furious. You're not going to be able to bury this." The staff member's composure faltered. "Online?" "Yes," Victor said flatly, "and you should know something else." He pulled a sleek black business card from his pocket and handed it over. "I'm not just a passenger. I own the controlling interest in this airline." The man's eyes widened. The younger staff member's mouth actually fell open for a split second. Victor continued. "So this is what's going to happen. You will get me the name of every crew member on that flight, and you will preserve every second of security footage from the jet bridge and boarding area. If anything mysteriously goes missing, we will have a much bigger problem." The staff member nodded quickly. "Understood." Shanice shifted Jalen to her other arm, watching the exchange. There was no raised voice from Victor, no visible anger, just the kind of steady authority that made people move fast. Passengers passing through the gate were slowing down, some whispering to each other. A few recognized Shanice from the video already making its rounds online. The man in the baseball cap leaned toward her. "You're going to get justice for this. No way they can ignore it now." Shanice gave him a small, grateful smile. The staff members began taking statements from witnesses right there at the gate. The younger crew member stood close to Shanice, ready to back her up. Colleen had not appeared, and Shanice doubted she would, at least not willingly. But what neither Shanice nor most of the passengers knew yet was how quickly the video would spread and how loud the public would be once the story reached every corner of the internet. By the time Shanice and Victor had reached the baggage claim area, Victor's phone was buzzing steadily in his jacket pocket. He ignored it for the moment, focusing instead on making sure Shanice and Jalen were comfortable in a corner, away from the busy carousel. Shanice had noticed the way people kept glancing at them. Not curious in a casual way, but in recognition. It wasn't just fellow passengers from the flight anymore. Strangers from other gates seemed to know who they were. Victor finally pulled out his phone, glanced at the screen, and exhaled slowly. "It's everywhere," he said, holding the device where Shanice could see. The video was already on 3 different social media platforms, each clip with thousands of shares. The angle from the woman's phone showed the slap clearly. You could hear Jalen's cry right after. And then, Victor's calm but firm voice telling Colleen what she wouldn't do. Comments were flooding in. "This is outrageous. Fire her. She assaulted a mother holding a baby." "Who is the guy in the aisle?" "He handled that like a boss." Victor's phone rang. He glanced at the caller ID, then handed Jalen to Shanice and stepped a few feet away to answer. His voice was low, but Shanice caught words like press team, internal review, and "I'm already here." When he returned, he looked directly at Shanice. "They know now, officially." "Who's they?" she asked. "The board, senior leadership, everybody who thinks they run this place," Victor replied. "They just learned they've got a public relations disaster, and the person at the center of it is my wife." A small group of airline employees in crisp navy suits approached. The man in front introduced himself as Patrick Nolan, Vice President of Operations. His expression was polite, but his eyes gave away that he already understood the severity of what had happened. Mr. Marlowe, Mrs. Marlowe, Nolan began, first, I want to personally apologize for what occurred on your flight. We are deeply concerned by the reports and the video footage. Shanice shifted Jalen on her hip. Reports? You mean the proof that's already online? Nolan hesitated. Yes, and that as well. I assure you we are taking immediate steps to address it. The crew member involved has been removed from duty pending investigation. Victor didn't break eye contact with him. You'll also make sure she's not able to step foot on any aircraft again until I've reviewed the case personally. Nolan nodded quickly. Absolutely. Shanice looked between them. I don't want this swept under the rug. This wasn't just unprofessional. It was dangerous. My son's head was right there. I understand, Nolan said, and I'd like to arrange a private meeting to go over exactly what happened from your perspective, Mrs. Marlowe. Not just hers, Victor interjected. You'll get statements from every witness who stepped forward today, and you'll start drafting a public apology, one that doesn't sound like it was written by lawyers trying to avoid blame. Nolan's jaw tightened slightly, but he nodded. Understood. Two of the other employees took over handling Shanice's luggage, offering to walk them through a quieter exit route to avoid reporters who had apparently begun gathering outside. As they moved toward a side corridor, Shanice's phone buzzed with a message from the woman on the flight who had filmed the video. Just saw you on the news. She showed it to Victor. The news? He gave a small shrug. It's a big story now, and they're going to keep talking about it until we make sure something changes. When they reached the waiting area where a private car was parked, Nolan paused. Mr. Marlowe, I'm aware of your position with the airline. I just want to say, on a personal level, I'm sorry it took something like this for us to be here having this conversation. Victor looked at him steadily. You're right. It shouldn't take a viral video to address basic respect and safety on your flights. Nolan opened his mouth to respond, but Victor stepped into the car and motioned for Shanice to follow. Inside, Shanice settled Jalen into a car seat provided by the driver. She turned to Victor. So what happens now? He leaned back, his expression firm. Now we make sure this isn't just about one flight attendant. It's about the way this company treats people. Every passenger, every day. And we're going to set the tone for that starting today. But while the corporate wheels were beginning to turn, the public wasn't waiting for official statements, and the reaction outside the boardroom was already becoming impossible to control. By the next morning, Shanice woke to the faint glow of her phone screen lighting up the hotel nightstand. She hadn't even opened her eyes yet, but the sound of constant notification pings told her the story had grown legs overnight. Victor was already up, seated at the small desk by the window, laptop open, speaking quietly into a headset. No, don't issue the statement yet, he said. We're not rushing something out that sounds sanitized. I'll approve the wording personally. Shanice sat up, rubbing her eyes. It's still blowing up? She asked. Victor muted his call. Every outlet from Los Angeles to Boston's covering it. Videos hit a few million views. She picked up her phone. The top notification was a headline from a national morning show. Mother slapped while holding infant, caught on flight video. There were interview requests from local reporters in Minneapolis, messages from strangers offering support, and even a few direct messages from former flight attendants sharing their own experiences with Colleen. Scrolling through comments, Shanice saw an overwhelming wave of sympathy, but also some anger directed at her for making a scene. She exhaled slowly. I guess the internet has opinions about everything. Let them, Victor said. It keeps the story alive. By mid-morning, the airline's public relations team released a carefully worded statement acknowledging the incident, confirming Colleen Dresner was on leave and promising a full investigation. But it was too late. The public had already decided where they stood. Outside the hotel, 2 news vans were parked by the curb. A small crowd lingered, hoping to catch a glimpse of the family from the viral clip. The hotel manager discreetly offered them a service entrance exit to avoid the commotion. Later that day, Victor and Shanice met with Nolan and the airline's legal counsel in a private conference room. The atmosphere was tense but polite. We're aware this has caused significant damage to our brand, Nolan began. We want to work with you to address it head on. Victor leaned forward. This isn't just about damage control. You're going to review every single crew member's training on conflict resolution and customer interaction. and you're going to set a zero-tolerance policy for physical contact with passengers. The legal counsel, a woman in her 40s with sharp glasses, nodded. That can be implemented immediately. We can also arrange a public-facing initiative, perhaps in partnership with Mrs. Marlowe, to highlight safety and respect for families traveling with young children. Shanice hesitated. I don't want this to be about making the airline look good. I want it to mean something. I don't want another parent holding a baby to be treated like I was. That's exactly why you should be part of it, Victor said, his tone steady. You have a voice now. People are listening. Meanwhile, online pressure was mounting. Passengers from other flights began posting about their own negative experiences with Colleen, creating a thread of complaints that stretched back years. The hashtag Justice for Shanice trended for 2 days straight. Colleen herself hadn't spoken publicly, but a blurry photo of her leaving her house had surfaced, prompting more heated debates in the comment sections. Late that afternoon, Victor got a call from one of the airline's board members. He put it on speaker. Victor, we've never seen a PR crisis move this fast, the voice said. We're getting calls from investors. This needs to be resolved in a way that shows accountability. Victor's answer was simple. Then resolve it, publicly, and make sure your employees know this isn't tolerated, not because of who my wife is, but because it's wrong. The next day, the airline announced that Colleen's employment had been terminated. The statement was brief but clear, citing violation of safety and conduct policies. Shanice read it twice before setting her phone down. I thought I'd feel, satisfied, she admitted to Victor. But it's just sad. All of this because someone couldn't treat another person with basic respect. Victor nodded. That's the part we can't fix for her, but we can make sure the lesson sticks. The younger flight attendant from their flight sent Shanice a message. I just wanted to say thank you. You speaking up made a difference for all of us. Shanice smiled at her phone. She didn't know the woman well, but she knew the feeling. That relief when someone in the room finally says what you've been too afraid to say. But while the airline had made its decision, Shanice still had her own choice to make, whether to quietly return to her life or use the moment to speak to something bigger. 2 days later, Shanice stood at a podium in a modest conference room inside the airline's Minneapolis headquarters. The walls behind her were bare except for the company's logo, and a row of cameras faced her from the back. Reporters sat shoulder to shoulder in folding chairs, notebooks ready, microphones extended. Victor was to her left, silent but present. Nolan stood off to the side with members of the communications team, looking like they were holding their breath. Shanice adjusted the microphone. Her hands weren't shaking. She'd made her decision the night before, staring at Jalen while he slept. First, she began, I want to thank the passengers who stepped up that day, those who recorded, those who spoke up, and those who made sure the truth didn't get buried. Without you, this could have been dismissed as a misunderstanding. The room was quiet, except for the soft clicking of camera shutters. I've been thinking about what happened on that flight, and I realized something. The slap was just one moment. It was wrong, and it hurt. But the part that stayed with me more was the way it made me feel, like I wasn't a person worth basic respect. And that's something no one should have to feel, ever, no matter where they are or what they're carrying in their arms. She paused, letting the words settle. This isn't about one airline employee. This is about how we treat each other when we think no one's watching, or when we think our authority puts us above accountability. I don't want this to just end with a termination notice. I want it to lead to better training, better awareness, and most of all, better humanity on every flight. For parents, for elderly passengers, for anyone who's vulnerable in that moment they step on board. Victor's eyes stayed on her, calm but proud. I'm using this experience to push for new guidelines at this airline, she continued. That means mandatory de-escalation training, clear conduct policies, and a safe way for crew members to report when their coworkers cross the line. No one should be afraid to speak up. Not the passenger, not the crew. One reporter raised a hand. Mrs. Marlowe, do you plan to take legal action? Shanice met his gaze. Right now, my focus is on change. That doesn't mean other options are off the table, but my priority is making sure this doesn't happen again. A second reporter asked, do you forgive her? The question lingered in the air for a moment. Shanice took a slow breath. Forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. I can choose to let go of the anger so it doesn't live in me, but I'll never excuse what she did. That's not for her. It's for my own peace. She stepped back from the podium, signaling the end of her statement. Cameras clicked rapidly. Nolan moved forward to take over, promising reporters that the airline would release details of their new training programs within the month. Afterward, in the hallway, the younger flight attendant from that day found Shanice. She looked different, relieved, almost lighter. "You made me feel like speaking up actually matters," she said. Shanice smiled. "It always matters, even if it's hard." When they finally left the building, the afternoon sun was bright on the pavement. The crowd outside had thinned, but a few people still stood holding small handmade signs with phrases like "respect passengers" and "accountability matters." Victor opened the car door for her. "You handled that perfectly," he said. "I didn't do it for perfect," Shanice replied, settling Jalen into his seat. "I did it because the next mom who boards a plane shouldn't have to wonder if she's about to be humiliated." Victor nodded. "That's the real win here." As the car pulled away, Shanice glanced back once at the headquarters building. She didn't know what would come next. News cycles moved fast, and eventually the internet would latch onto a new outrage. But she knew she'd planted something today, and whether or not people remembered her name, she hoped they'd remember the message. Respect isn't optional. Treating people with dignity costs nothing, but the price of failing to do it can be far greater than you think. So the next time you're in a position of authority, whether it's serving a drink at 30,000 feet, running a meeting, or just holding the door for someone, remember that the smallest action can change the tone of someone's entire day. Make sure it's for the better. And if this story resonated with you, don't just move on. Share it. Talk about it. Keep the conversation going, because change doesn't come from silence. Subscribe for more real stories that matter, because the way we treat each other is worth talking about.